Hi, welcome to the Harvestworks online event series. My name is Carol Parkinson, and I'm the director of our nonprofit Digital Media Arts Center in New York City. For this event, Harvestworks is pleased to share the works of two of our recent artists. Victoria Manganiello was a 2020 artist in residence who worked with programmer Frank Spigner to create a sonic interface for her textile sculptures. Independent study artist Meredith Starr worked with programmer Danielle McPhatter to realize her extended reality artworks. Following each presentation tonight, the artist will be open to any questions from the audience. A bit about Victoria. During her Harvestworks fellowship, Victoria explored the possibilities of conductive thread and soft speakers using embroidery and hand sewing. In this project update tonight, Victoria will show images and reflections about working with these materials during the pandemic and share plans and inquiries for the future. Conceptually, the project explores the relationship between sounds and materials and how the sound of something may or may not influence our cultural understanding of that thing. Victoria is a textile artist based in Brooklyn, New York. She is currently a professor of textiles at NYU and Parsons New School. I think we should start. Victoria, how are you doing?
Great, I'm great. Thank you for having me, Carol and Harvestworks. It's a pleasure to share my update tonight. And although we were just saying how the last gathering was right before the pandemic started. I really am happy to be a part of the community and hope that when it's safe to do so that I can share my project in person and meet other folks in the community. So I can start by sharing my screen, if that's okay with you, Carol. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly walk through my process and my work in general, and then I have a lot of images and updates to share with the work that I've been doing for this fellowship. So like Carol mentioned, I am a textile artist. I'm a yarn spinner. So I work with fibers that I spin into yarn. I'm also a dyer. I work with natural and synthetic colors, including materials that come from plants, bugs, food scraps, and then also synthetic chemicals. I'm a weaver, so I work with a floor loom, and I'm very interested in using those materials that I'm making to incorporate into this process of weaving and making my own structures. And then let's say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been interested in this sort of subculture within textiles called E-Textile. And I've been working with, experimenting with different conductive materials and introducing technology in general into my work, both conceptually and from material standpoints. I am also an educator, and I've really come over time to embrace the idea that teaching is an art form and engaging with communities directly and sharing and knowledge and collaborating is a big part of my work. And I'm especially inspired by the history of technology and especially the contributions that women have made to technology through the wisdom of textiles. So Aydah Lovelace, who has come to be someone that many of us are familiar with recently, she was involved in early, we might give her the credit for being the first coder as far as we define that term now, for her inspiration from the jacquard loom. And then I'm also, another example that inspires me are the hand woven memory cores that powered the Apollo 11 mission that brought astronauts to the moon. So these were actually woven by hand by women. And it's just another amazing connection between textiles and technology in our history. So I make large scale installations like these using all of those techniques. I call these geography installations because I use mapping as a way to form my abstraction. And then I'm also working on a project called Computer 1.0 through my design collaboration, which is called Soft Monitor. And my GIF is not working right now, unfortunately. This is a GIF in the middle. But essentially, this is a hand-woven cloth made with hollow tubing through which a series of liquid and air is moving in an intentional pattern. And this is, again, exploring the relationship between textile and technology. I've been recently also working on a project called Fermentation Quilt using soft heaters. And so this is a tool that you can use to make yogurt and other fermented foods. And then I'm working on a documentary about the relationship between women and textile across industries. So that's all the different sorts of things, or at least some of the things that I'm working on. And certainly what led me to my time with Harvestworks. I initially was very interested, like Carol mentioned in the introduction, between the relationship between sound and textiles. And so I applied with this model that I'd been working with, sort of mimicking the shapes of the large scale installations I was working with and the materials I was working with, but thought about replacing them with conductive materials so that I could bring electricity and information directly through the cloth that I was hand weaving. So throughout this last year, I did a lot of research on different kinds of conductive materials, exploring things like resistance, stretchiness, working with woven materials, knit materials, non-woven materials. What could I solder to if I want to make something that's soft, that's installation based, if I'm going to have people interacting with it, how my connections are going to work. Thinking about the feel too. I've also had this idea in the back of my mind. Of course, because of COVID, we've not yet had the chance to really explore it, but what if I collaborated with dancers to do some kind of installation that was also a performance? And then thinking about the other materials that are involved in creating these conductive ones. I explored lots of different materials and threads. Here are just some examples. And then I did some experiments also with other materials that aren't threads and fabrics, just to see what was possible. So that was a big part of my research this year, and sourcing materials and testing them. I made a lot of coils. So these are all hand embroidered, and I explored different kinds of, working with those different conductive materials, copper, silver, stainless steel, etc. Seeing how close I could get the rotations of the coil when I'm sewing by hand. I played with different shapes. So working with a circle, with a square. You can see this image on the right, this pile, I made tons of them, exploring the back material, because of course I'm going to need these coils to vibrate when I bring the magnet to them. So what sorts of materials facilitate that? So this was a big exploration for me for what was possible. Here's some more samples and tests that I was doing, working with all those different materials. And then, of course, trying it out and bringing the magnet there to see what sorts of sounds we could get. I even tried pumping salty liquid into a tube. Just really wanted to play around with what was possible with conductivity, especially because my other projects, I am weaving with hollow tubes and pumping material through them. So if anyone was curious, this did not work. I could not get this. I'm not sure if that's because it's just so heavy that it wouldn't be able to vibrate, but it was still a fun experiment to see, because salty water is conductive, to see if we could get. You can see on the image on the right, we put an LED there just to make sure that the connection was working, and so it did. We were able to pass electricity through this coil, but it wasn't strong enough to make an audible sound. And then I also experimented with knitting the material. And it was my work with Frank who helped me realize that perhaps the coils were not my best bet at creating a textile that would produce sound. And he was so helpful. And the research that he did for me was just really useful in understanding what was the best approach for going forward. I learned a lot from making what felt like hundreds of coils and experimenting with different shapes and things. But in the end, knitting these, and I'm going to be weaving some too, these panels that are entirely conductive material was the direction I ended up deciding to go. And so I also experimented with different densities and shapes and sizes. also playing around with making a material. This is something I hand knit on the right. So making a material that's got some parts that are conductive and some aren't, so that you can, they're essentially proximity sensors. So you can get closer to one or to the other, and each will play a different sound. And then I also experimented on the left as an image of a series of magnets that are contained within little pockets, alternating north and south. So I could bring conductive thread strategically through them and create a proximity sensor using this too. I played around with lots of different amplifiers, some small ones that are sewable, some larger ones. Ultimately, Frank helped me in assembling this breadboard with the microcontrollers on the right, which relied on an axolotl, which is on the left there, which frustratingly took a really long time to get one. So Frank made this amazing code that, you know, worked directly with the axolotl, but I couldn't find one because they weren't producing them anymore. But eventually I did find one used online from someone in Spain, and it took a really long time to ship because of COVID. So I actually only just got it a couple of weeks ago. But I am really excited now that I have these components to sort of hook them up to all my sample materials, my conductive knit, my conductive woven materials. So one big aspect of this project that I haven't talked yet about is the sounds that I want to play, that I want these textiles to play. And I'm sort of curious in exploring how what are the sounds of the materials around us. So I've also been working with natural dyes and experimenting with different sorts of materials and making them to play with what are the sounds of those materials, and you know, figuring out what sorts of sounds I want to play. This is still very much a investigation that I'm still working with, especially because I only just got the axolotl board, but I'm really excited now that I have it to see what I want to do. And then the image on the right is an in-progress installation that I'm working on. I'm currently doing a residency in Michigan, and this is the studio space that they've given me, so I've been able to work there. And I'm excited to use this large space that I have to like create these bigger conductive panels to play around with and see what's possible. So that's where I'm at now with the project. That's me and my website and Instagram, et cetera, if anyone wants to look up more about what I'm doing. And otherwise I can answer questions. I tried to speak fast enough so that I would have time for questions. And I can, go back to any of the slides I might have shown if there's a specific one.
I was actually interested in what was the box called? The gray box?
The axolotl.
And what is that supposed to do?
So it should allow me to connect my different textiles to different sound files. So in the installation here, each panel will be connected to a separate sound file, and they're all proximity sensors. So if you if you walk along this series of hanging panels, as you get close to one, it'll play a sound. As you move to the next, it'll play a different sound. So the axolotl is like a control system. Full disclosure, I haven't been able to work with it yet because it literally, just arrived recently. And Frank prepared for me information that'll help me get started, although I haven't been able to do it quite yet. The symptoms of the pandemic, I suppose. But I am, I finally have it now. So I'm excited to see what's possible. And it's great timing in a way because I do have access to this big space. So I can really play with like how close and how far I can get to these materials and playing with volume and all of this.
So back to that other picture. So the box, the handmade box looks like it has multiple inputs. So would each one of those inputs on the top of the box be connected to a panel?
Correct.
I see. That's nice.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it seems like I can have eight panels connected to this, but I think I could connect more than one panel to a single input. So the installation I'm working on now has 21 panels. So maybe I have, each sound is represented twice, but at different volumes, or it seems that I can really play around with that.
There is a question from Pamela. What inspired you to begin incorporating sound into your textiles?
This is my first exploration truly into working with sound in a focused way. But I think for a long time, my practice as a maker with such loud techniques has forced me to think about sounds frequently. So for example, spinning, I use a spinning wheel. And so I'm tapping my feet. And so there's a rhythm there. The weaving loom, also very physical. I'm moving my arms back and forth, and there's these sounds that are playing. So it's the process of making has always been a sonorous one for me. And when I started learning more about E-Textiles and seeing examples of other artists who were working with soft speakers, it inspired me to sort of try it out. So the Harvestworks Fellowship was the perfect chance for me to do that with guidance, because the attempts I had made before, I could only go so far without help from someone who really knows this stuff. So it's been a great way to dive deeper into a realm that I wasn't otherwise familiar with.
And there's another question from Naomi. What do they sound like? And that sort of opens the question of whether you're going to go out and record sounds that you will then, I see, play back through the panels. And what's your, what thoughts do you have about what you will record?
The sounds that I want to record are connected to my materials. So the image on the left here shows experiments that I've been doing with different fibers and different dyes. So the columns on this card represent different fibers: silk, cotton, linen, wool, etc. And then the rows represent different modifiers to my dye. So I worked with madder root. I changed the pH, I changed the fixative, I added minerals. So I've been recording these processes of mixing these materials. At first, I wanted to figure out a way to collect the vibrations on like a sort of micro level of these materials, because obviously everything's vibrating all the time. So what's the vibration of iron versus copper versus madder root versus silk? And could I sort of translate in what would we call it, in a sort of like historical fiction kind of way, make up my own version of those vibrations into sounds and play that. I also want to, although I haven't been able to do it because of COVID, record sounds of these materials being harvested too. So like collecting the roots, and maybe the sounds of the materials are actually the sounds of the people that interact with them, the people that are harvesting them, planting them, processing them. I recently was able to process a barberry bush because a friends had one in their yard and they were getting rid of it. So it was a chance for me to do that. But living in Brooklyn, there's not so many harvesting opportunities, besides the fact that we're Harvestworks, actually. That just occurred to me. But that is, a direction I want to go. It's been this time during the fellowship has been focused mostly on getting the technology. And now that I have the board and the microcontroller and the code that Frank produced for me, I want to set it all up and then just start putting things in there and playing it and interacting with it and seeing what's possible with that proximity sensor. One of my big questions is, like, if I get closer or farther, can that change in space change my volume, or could that change some other aspect of the recorded sound? I mentioned earlier that I had thought about collaborating with a dancer. So what if a dancer moves between these panels as they're hanging from the ceiling, and their choreography could correspond to the sounds? And so these are all question marks still, but I'm hoping that while I have this, now that I have all my tools within this next year, and then a big goal would be to eventually exhibit it with Harvestworks, like we had thought about doing last year. Obviously it didn't happen, but my hope would be to do something that's in person that could be observed and interacted with directly, that people could walk in between these panels and create sounds.
And where is this space here that you have on the screen?
I'm in Michigan. I'm in an artist residency here.
I see.
So luckily I was able to I was accepted to this program. It's called Prairie Ronde. I can put the name in the chat here. So part of the residency is that they give me access to this huge space. And it's a funded residency too, which is essential. So and everyone here has been so fantastic. So if anyone is thinking about this program, I would love to share my experience with you if you want to apply.
And are you seeing the chats, Victoria?
Yeah.
Oh, so you can read Naomi's chat. I'm working with an experimental musician to put together a large installation, and we've been talking about recording and embedding sounds from the building and neighborhood, which used to be a series of mills. Naomi, is that in New York City?
I can just.
Oh, there she is. Hi.
I can just unmute myself here. Hi. No, it's actually in Columbia, South Carolina. So at 701 Contemporary Center for the Arts, they've got a pretty nice size space, but that building and several other right nearby were all cotton mills, basically. And you know, it's a big textile region here. So
I would love to talk to you more about that, Naomi.
Yeah.
Maybe we can exchange information. And yeah, this program I'm at now, it's also an old mill too. So if you're working on mills and you're thinking about doing a residency, that you're right up there, Allie. So yeah, I'll share my email and then we can maybe find a time to talk more. Put it here.
And Naomi, are you looking at some kind of sculptural or for the installation?
Yeah, I'm don't know what to call them. I usually call myself a sculptor, but we're talking about, what I want to say. We're trying to figure out ways to make sense of the big space and these big, beautiful windows. It looks in some ways very much like the space that you are using, Victoria, and thinking about like reverberations, maybe as a title, in all of the permutations and connotations of that word. But we were originally going to use really basic construction materials as kind of a walk through sort of maze-like experience for people, but I'm not sure that's what we will ultimately do. Our exhibition got pushed basically 2 years now, so we're not going to be showing until next May. But yeah, hanging things and dyeing things and incorporating sound all sounds great to me. It's what I've been working on too. So
yeah, I'm excited to talk more. Yeah, I think that like I was saying, what is the sound of cotton? And is it the sound of the people making it? Is it sound of the material being harvested, of it being processed? And I really like this idea that sounds can truly contribute to the way we understand things. And cotton is such a rich part of our history as a nation. This country was built on the enslaved labor of cotton pickers, et cetera. So like, what are those sounds and how can that add to our understanding of the history of textiles? So that's what inspires me. It sounds like we have a lot in common.
Yeah, and and like recognizing and remembering the communities that built that place and that are not really recognized. The whole area, the university here was built by slaves, and there's one tiny little plaque that sort of references that in town, and otherwise there's not much. So yeah, it's history gets forgotten all the time and changed and all sorts of things. Yeah. Oh yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just finished this book actually, which you'll enjoy, I think, about textiles and slavery in this country.
And Victoria, are these panels that you have here, are they made from the conductive thread? Or how are you doing?
They're currently, no, these ones are not, because my conductive samples are smaller, but I'm gonna like replace them so I can experiment. So I have panels with the conductive thread. And so for now, especially because I have those 8 outputs. So one of the experiments I want to do is, does every panel act as a proximity sensor? Maybe some do and some don't, or some higher, some lower. So to start, I'm kind of just setting up the space, and then I'm going to swap out the conductive materials. But these have all been dyed with the madder root material, which is my sample card on the left. So I'm still kind of sorting out how everything's going to land. I ended up the conductive material that I ended up working with, that ended up proving to be the best to work with, was a silver material, which feels so fancy. But it's really conductive and also easy to embroider and weave and knit. A lot, like the copper threads I worked with were too hard to knit with. They were too crunchy. And I guess that's what the funding is for, to buy the good material. So I was really grateful to be able to get this thread, which makes a huge difference in the quality and everything.
Hi, Victoria. This is Sophie. Thank you so much for sharing your work and the process. It's really inspiring. And I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the talk. When you say madder root, I had a question. Like because I missed the beginning of the talk. Like what does that mean?
So madder is a bush. It's a plant, and its roots. It takes about 5 years, but the roots end up being able to produce these really rich colors if you process them correctly. So I basically boil them, and then I add like different kinds of minerals and salts and stuff. And then I can make a solution and I apply them to the fabric. And I, by no means, have discovered this. There's a really rich history of natural color extraction and application across so many cultures, which is part of why I love working with it, because every culture has their process. And so I've been especially over the last year, but maybe for the last 10 years of my practice as an artist, been exploring what's possible with color, but especially because of COVID, like I can't go anywhere. So I'm just cooking up different colors and really exploring what's possible. And I really like madder root because it's an especially ancient dye source. It's been there are traces of it in objects from 20,000 years ago. And so I like the idea that I can act as this like through line throughout history. Mm-hmm. So again, if I want to explore what's the sound of a material, maybe that's a way to like time travel, kind of, is to work with this material. It's so historical.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I was, thank you for that. And I was really interested in you, and you were talking about like vibrational kind of energy and in the materials. Because interestingly, my project has also kind of gotten to a point where, I have created this mythical AI that is made out of all the minerals and metals that go into making up our technologies. Yeah. And then I also have been working with Frank, but I mean, just like at the more preliminary stages, because the audio sculpture and audiovisual sculpture that we're making, it's going to be in VR. So I first need to work on the visual side of things, and then I'll work with Frank by next month, hopefully. But the interesting thing is, like, I have literally since yesterday and like last few weeks, I've been thinking about like, what is going to be the sound of like silicon carbide and like indium and copper, and because these are all the different, like, I have yeah, like what is the vibrational energy in this, like iron ore, and because the blob AI thing that I've made is like lives in a mine, so like what happens in the inside a mine, and again like exploring the history of mining, and so it's just been that process of like thinking about like what the sound would be, I just really connected with the way you were talking about it. And then Naomi, hearing Naomi talk about it too. Hi, Naomi. It was just like, wow, all three of us are kind of thinking about like vibrations and matter and like this kind of granularity of sound inside matter and how it could be expressed through some form of either narrative storytelling or like speculative thinking and or like, you know, going back in history and like, yeah, so I was just wanted to express that appreciation and gratitude for, you know, learning about your work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so great to hear that. I'm grateful for your response. And I'd love to talk more about what you're working on and share more the materials that I use to make these colors. And again, I'm like by far the first person to do it. There's thousands and thousands of people who've come before me, but I am using materials that are used in computers too, like iron and copper.
Right. I was going to ask, like, when you say the matter root, like, what is the iron part in this?
The iron is, I added as a ferrous sulfate powder, although you can extract your own from rusty nails. And the technical term is that it saddens the color. So you can see on my image here on the left, the very bottom row, I've added copper sulfate. And then the second from the bottom, I've added iron sulfate. And so it saddens these red colors.
Like saddens, like the sadden, like that word?
That's the technical word, or at least like in the resources that I've read about this, which is, I think, also really interesting that these dark, like we associate sadness with the darker colors and what that means also about our understanding of those words and those colors and what they represent and like which culture decided it was sad, and because colors are meaningful in different ways in different places. There's so much to explore, I think, with these sorts of materials, including what we've all been talking about, like what are their sounds and how those meanings could change depending on where you are.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Thank you.
Oh, Naomi, thanks for sharing this book. Yeah.
And Victoria, the variations in the colors, that depends on the amount of your medium you put in there. Is that it?
Yeah, it depends on what I've added. So I dyed all of these materials to start with madder root, which is that ancient bush root. And then I changed them in a second step. So on the first row, I added acid. I added you could add like lemon juice, but I used a crystallized citric acid. The second row is alkaline. So I added a washing soda to change the pH to more alkaline. The middle row is neutral, so no change. Iron, like we just described, and copper. And then the different columns represent the different fibers. So because there's also the chemical reaction. So the rightmost column is wool, and the leftmost column is silk. So like the same application of material, but onto different fiber, you again get a totally other. So with this one dye, we can get, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can get 25 colors just from one dye by, changing different variables. And yeah, just as a process, it's very time consuming, and there's a lot of chemistry, lots of sounds, the movement of water, the mixing, the heat, lots of vibrations, which I'm hoping to figure out a way to, Surabhi, maybe I'll have to talk to you about it to kind of capture those material vibrations.
It's Surabhi.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me.
The A is very confusing for everyone starts with Surabhi, so it's totally fine.
Surabhi, yes, I'll have it now.
Yeah,
I appreciate your sharing that with me.
You might actually be interested in Jocelyn Ho's project called The Women's Work.
Oh yeah.
She is using irons or household objects in this particular project, and we have a document on our website, on the Harvestworks website, where she actually embeds sensors in the iron, in the object, and then irons the fabric, okay? So her question was, what does this fabric sound like, you know, between silk and canvas and cotton? And you might be interested in it. She has a very particular, she comes from an electronic music background. So the sounds that she has selected are drawn from her music library, and they're fairly abstract. And but you might be interested in looking at the video just to see how she's constructed these sensors in the object, and then uses that object to contact different fabrics in order to generate sound.
Awesome. You said Jocelyn Hose?
Jocelyn Ho, H-O.
Okay, great. I'm gonna look that up too. Yeah, I feel very excited by like this project for me. I really started at the beginning when we started with Harvestworks, and then COVID slowed everything down. So I still feel like I have so much ahead, which is exciting. And I look forward to sharing more of it with the community as it grows. And I also love talking to people and collaborating. And, you know, I just think projects are better when they happen in the context of community than solo, which is why I love talking to people about their work and sharing mine. So thank you all thank you, Carol and Harvestworks, for having me. And thank you, Jocelyn and Surabhi, for your comments and questions.
Yeah, we should definitely find another time to connect again. I've also, because of COVID, I had to like literally take an entire break from art making, and now I'm like getting back into things and trying to wrap things up and move things along. So it's just nice to be connected with and talk about things again. So it'll be, we'll email each other. We're all probably on the same email thread, so we can get that.
Yeah, I'll email you both for looking forward to it. And we had at one point we had that WhatsApp chat, but
which kind of felt
that
was like early on excitement, and then COVID, and I was thinking like,
So Victoria, maybe you want to roll back since Surabhi missed the first section. I mean, I think you went really fast. And I thought a lot of the slides that you showed were very interesting.
Sure, I can go.
And I wouldn't mind seeing it again.
Sure. Yeah, I was just trying to keep myself under 30 minutes, but I guess you said the second artist isn't starting until 6. Yeah, I can, if there's anything in particular that someone was curious about, I could stop. But I can also just kind of say the same.
Are you using a machine here? You must be using a sewing machine.
No, by hand.
Look at that.
Yeah, I did try some with the machine, but it felt easier to make the rings of the coil closer by hand because the machine is going so fast. So if you like press the pedal too hard, one of my earlier, so this one I did with the machine, but it got so close that I had to mend it because of course I'll get a short if my coil touches itself. So then I ended up focusing more on the hand stitched ones.
And that's all conductive thread, right? The copper?
Yeah. I tried all different kinds of materials. So that was why I made so many. You can kind of get a sense from this image on the left. I've got dozens of them because I was trying different variables. Okay, copper thread on top of a wool background, copper thread on top of a silk background, copper thread on top of a cotton background, copper thread, silver thread, stainless steel. I even tried a couple of different conductors together, and just to kind of figure out testing each variable to see what worked best, and then hooking them up to the amplifier and my input and just playing some sound. And then I also tried working with different kinds of magnets too, stronger magnets are harder to find.
You must have an extensive notebook.
I do. Yeah. Yeah, I should have included photos of them actually. Yeah. Lots of tests. I actually, a lot of times I'll put notes on a piece of tape and then just tape that to the sample. Because when I have 30 or 40 of these coils, it's so hard to identify which one. I guess I could probably put like a number on it or something, but yeah, lots of notes. But it's been really fun. I really have learned a lot about this material and like what's possible with it, and also learned more about circuitry too, just by like needing to apply it to this context. I know that there's so much more to learn, of course, but it's a great entry point. And sometimes I've thought, like, if I was in school in physics class, if they'd taught me this while we were learning about electricity, I would have been so psyched. But as an elementary school student, I was not psyched about physics because it was delivered in a way that didn't, stimulate me. And I often think how this sort of stuff could really benefit so many students. And as an educator myself, I try to use that kind of from the opposite lens, because I'm working with university students, not younger kids, but, letting them learn about electricity through textile. And hopefully more educators will do. I think there are actually lots of educators who are doing this, but I just didn't have access to them as a kid.
Well, it looks like Meredith's here. Hi, Meredith. How are you doing? If there are more questions for Victoria, now's the time.
Your first slide. Is it where you started?
No, I showed so many slides. I talked about these different conductive materials that I experimented.
Yeah, this is where I came in. So.
Wow.
Yeah, and this was my initial model. So this is a coil, because this is conductive thread going through, and so I did hook this up to an amplifier and a sound input, and like if you get close to it, it'll play a sound. It's a model based off of my larger scale installations like this one, where I have these panels hanging. And so these are large scale panels that you can walk underneath. And so that's this model I made is based off of that sort of structure. And the idea that you could like walk inside the coil on a really large scale, which is something I'm still hoping to do it on that scale. And the image that we landed on at the end with my matter root installation where at my current residency is on this scale. So while I'm here, I want to, try this model out. Mm-hmm. And then, I just talked in the first half of the talk, I sort of introduced myself and my inspiration and my past projects. I'm working on a documentary about women in textiles across industries. And it's going to be a series of episodes. So in each episode, you'll meet a woman using the wisdom of textile to do something you wouldn't expect. So in one episode, you'll meet a woman who's hand knitting rayon kidney replacements, because the knitted structure is more acceptable by our bodies than the sort of like 3D printed version that we have now. And then maybe we meet a garment worker, and then an astronaut, and then a chef, and then a car designer, and just like women in all industries using textiles. And the underlying message is that textiles have been overlooked, but have actually contributed to so many advancements. Like I showed that example also of the woven memory core. So this was what brought astronauts to the moon on the Apollo 11 mission. It was hand woven, and it's a computer.
Wow.
And so when we think of, space travel, we don't think of textiles or women, but they are, instrumental to that history. And so my documentary is all about these stories.
These are awesome, great ideas. And I can't wait to see how, please keep on sharing as you make them and as you make progress.
Thank you.
It sounds very exciting.
If you could just show was it water that you were working with? The translucent, no, not those. This guy, this one here. This looked very interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about this piece?
Yeah, so this is a project called Computer 1.0, and it's something that I'm making in collaboration with my collaborator, Julian Goldman, and we call our design studio Soft Monitor. And I can go on my website to just like show you more photos of it. It's a hand woven textile. Actually, that GIF is better. It's a hand woven textile, and I'm weaving with a hollow tube through which I'm pumping an intentional series of liquid and air. And the liquids are actually made using materials, like we were saying before, materials that you would find in a computer, like copper and iron and aluminum. And the patterns are mimicking traditional weaving patterns. So the project is telling the story of the history of textiles and technology, but the piece is really large scale. And so let's see, I showed it at, I don't know if I have a good photo here, at the Indianapolis Museum of Contemporary Art last year. And so this image is, you can see there's like the systems, and it contains more than 4,000 feet of tubing.
Wow.
And there's more information on here too.
Nice.
And that's Soft Monitor is that project.
And is the documentary series already, like, have you started that? Was that a link, or I just saw the number?
I put the Instagram handle because
it's on Instagram. Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's in the early stages. We were actually supposed to start filming on March 27th of 2020, but obviously we all know that did not happen. And it's a travel documentary, like we were going to go all around the world to meet these women. So it hasn't happened yet, but all the plans that we had for 2020 have been postponed, but I'm hoping and have some plans for this summer to go back. Like I have plans to go to that biologist I mentioned, the woman who's doing the knitted kidney replacements. We're going to start filming with her in the summer. And I have some leads with production companies and distribution companies. So my hope is that I can like get a bit of traction. I'm raising money now and then, share it with the world, like on a PBS or something, or National Geographic or Netflix or something like that. But yeah, it's a passion project. Like all of this, it's passion projects, right? I'm not really getting, super paid yet, but one day but I'm really passionate about it. If that's not clear, I think that like there's so much wisdom in storytelling. And I really think as an artist, like our objects have the power to use knowledge as a way to change behavior. And if we can recognize the history of these materials that are so essential to being a human, like textile, we all wear it every day, all the time, from the moment of birth to, our last breath. But so many of us have zero idea who's making it, which hands are making it, how we should value it. So I think that this kind of project, my hope is that this kind of project can help like facilitate bigger change in the way that we support workers and across genders and all that.
Nice.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me share it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you so much
Thank you
for the presentation. It was really interesting to see how the pieces developed over the year and hear about your plans for continuing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pleased I got to share it.
And I think, since Meredith is here, I think we should move on to Meredith. Victoria, if you want to stick around, you're welcome. But I thought I would tell you a bit about Meredith. Meredith is an independent study artist, and she will present Splash, diving into virtual reality to promote social change. And she'll also discuss Plastic Swim and Plastic Pool, which are interactive extended reality experiences. These new media artworks combine a virtual and augmented reality, respectively, with a pool of plastic waste consumed by the artist and her family in 1 year. It's awesome. She will also touch upon the experience of making the works and also the power of extended realities to inspire empathy and awareness about environmental issues. Meredith is a full-time professor of visual arts at SUNY Suffolk Community College. So thank you, Meredith, for coming on board and sharing your work.
Thanks for having me, Carol. I wish Victoria had a chance to see the full presentation. I was Zoom teaching my 3D design students prior to the call, and there's the common thread of education between our talks. But one of the things I love so much about Harvestworks was in pre-COVID days when you could go in and everyone was doing a project that's so vastly different, but just all so incredible and inspiring with all this different technology. So I loved hearing even just a little bit about yours, and I hope to be able to see it in person when this is all over for sure. Okay, I will share my screen.
Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, I have the opposite schedule. My class starts at 6, so I'm gonna log off now. But I'll watch the recording because I'm super interested to learn about your work. So
thank you.
And thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I think for me, Carol, you have to enable screen sharing. It says I can't share my screen just yet. I will try again.
Yeah, try again. I have multiple participants can share simultaneously.
Okay, let's see.
Let's see. I don't want to do that. No.
It's arguing.
Oh, here I think I see an image. Is it a?
It's like the title. It says splash. Can you see that?
Oh no, I don't know.
No.
Let's see.
That's just on the screen. Yeah, I turned off my video camera so that people.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Let's see.
Oh goodness.
It says you've disabled.
How about this?
Okay.
Why don't you try that? Does that look? Is that better?
Let's see.
You've turned on absolutely all sharing.
Okay, let's see. I think now it's going to let me.
Yes. There we go. Beautiful.
Okay. So some people's sabbaticals look like this. And it's always fun when I see my friends post their hashtag sabbatical life photos from a beach vacation. But when it came time for me to apply for sabbatical at my community college, I was stuck on the fact that most of the time I'd spent at the beach looked more like this. I had been involved in creating an installation, as Carol mentioned, with plastic that my family had accumulated over the course of 1 year. I was cutting pieces of the plastic into small shards, and then I would arrange them into forms that resembled bodies of water. So this is actually an image from Art Lab Tokyo. I had arranged the forms of the plastic to sort of resemble abstract versions of the Great Lakes. The theme to the exhibit there was actually America, and they were really interested in the Great Lakes was something they responded to and were curious to learn a little bit more about how polluted they were. And I had experimented a bit with some new media in combination with the installation, but anything I had tried was failing to read as impactful. I often work with sound and video art as part of my artistic practice. This is an image from my series Narrative of Desire on the screen, which combined video projection onto a model. And technology is such a native part of my artistic practice. which is why I teach foundation studio art to graphic design and digital media animation students. And for them, I've always been able to bridge the material between fine arts and the technology they needed to learn because I've worked with it myself. But the demands of the job are often really prohibitive from exploring how to create emerging extended reality artworks. Though I was teaching a lot with existing apps, and that was beginning to give me a sense of how powerful they could be. And if for all the other educators who are here, it's sort of nice. I thought I'd talk about the apps that I've had some experience with, because it's nice to share resources. I'd been incorporating the night cafe in my modern art history class. And I'm really interested in the way that gaming and play could help students learn. Because when we, before we engage with the experience, the students study Night Cafe in their textbook and they read critical theory about the artwork. And then we visit the virtual reality lab to engage with the work and Van Gogh in the immersive experience. We have dynamic conversations after they take off the headset, comparing and contrasting the static 2D image of the artwork and the theory that they had researched with that emotional experience they felt inside the game. And very often they share they feel more connected to the artwork itself because in the virtual reality experience, they have an emotional impact about experiencing that impressionistic brush technique firsthand. It sort of swirls around you when you're inside the game, and it gave them a better understanding of what he was trying to accomplish. So this is an example of one of my students doing 3D rendering in Google Tilt. That's a VR app. And this allows you to draw in 3 dimensions. And so in pre-COVID days, students could plan for a site-specific installation out of wire. They bring the image of the location where they wanted to create their design and then visualize their project by making sketches with the controllers in 3 dimensions. And then that gaming experience connects them more deeply to the site, as well as give them a better sense of how their project could be rendered in 3 dimensions, because they're obviously their typical sketches are 2D in their sketchbook. So it's a pretty mind-blowing moment for everyone to sketch in 3D. And then in my drawing classes, we would look at Man Mask by Rachel Rawson, which comments on the use of violence in video games by illuminating the appearance of first-person shooters. The landscape becomes serene, and students recognize how influential the violence is by its absence. And we also try the Death Tolls experience. That's by Ali Islami. And it's a data visualization in virtual reality that aims to resensitize the user to the casualties of the terrorist attack in Europe, refugee deaths in the Mediterranean Sea, and the human cost of the Syrian civil war. And in particular, it's the scene on the screen when they confront hundreds of thousands of body bags that make them realize how impactful socially engaged art can be. And for me, it was my experience with those apps in particular and how they really impacted my students emotionally that inspired me to want to pursue learning virtual reality in my own practice. And when the opportunity to apply for sabbatical finally arose, I thought, what if I learned to create a virtual reality experience and tackled the issue of plastic in the ocean? This was another series I'd been exploring and did a lot of work on it during quarantine too, because we could escape to the house very early in the morning to sort of we'd gather plastic debris that had washed up on the shore. And then I'd sort of combine it into driftwood into like a quick little installation and take a photo. And then of course, remove the plastic debris from the site. So after my sabbatical had been accepted, my friend and also incredible artist, Sarah Sharp, recommended Harvestworks to pursue my course of study. And after I spoke with Carol and programmer Danielle McPhatter, who would be my teacher, I committed to learning Blender, Unity, and the sound editing software FMod. This photo over here is the super cool studio at Harvestworks where I was fortunate enough to be able to work, and I miss it so much. And if the screen looks crowded and overwhelmed, that's how I felt in the beginning. I was definitely reminded of how overwhelmed a student can be when facing learning an entirely new medium to work in, and even just the vocabulary alone. And my sabbatical definitely wasn't going to be a hammock on the beach in Tahiti, but I felt really fortunate to be working on it. Danielle instilled in me early on that the project would be stronger and definitely more gratifying if I was able to go out there and source assets through the gathering of my own research. And in the early days, I found myself driving to local beaches to document the sand and terrain and study the specular reflection of the ocean to incorporate into my project. And I was also committed to achieving my goal by incorporating critical research about plastic in the ocean. I visited the Brooklyn Aquarium, where they have an interactive game on site to learn some statistics, as well as look at murals painted on buildings in Coney Island with staggering statistics. And in case you can't read a few of them, it says so by 2050, the oceans will contain more plastics than fish. A single plastic bag can take 1,000 years to degrade, and 8 million metric tons of the plastic enter the ocean each year. Obviously, I was doing more research beyond these field trips, but I thought it was really important to do field trips and see how other artists had already sort of incorporated statistics into their artwork. And so here you see a bunch of assets that I did incorporate into the project that were sourced from my own research. The terrain is a height map of the East Coast, specifically to the New York region. The skyline is a photo I took from Fort Tilden in Brooklyn, which you'll see later in the game. The seamless texture that I built was from that documentation I took at Jones Beach, and the sounds of waves and seagulls and a hidden beach in Greenport. I documented a hidden beach in Greenport, Long Island. And the plastic bag sound, I actually blew in the breeze and I ran after it with a microphone. And for me, all of this research and asset making was a really strong entrance into the project and had me really excited about it. In fact, one of my favorite parts of creating the materials was documenting hundreds of pieces of plastic debris that would ultimately become the interactive component in the game. And there was this chance encounter at the beach with the plastic bag that inspires the beginning scene. I think I can click it. Yeah, and I rescued the bag, by the way, when it becomes integral to the game as well. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes for the development of Plastic Swim. Over the course of about 9 months, I worked with Danielle at Harvestworks to develop the project. And this is the entrance scene into the game. That's where the player can physically stand in the center of the pool in the gallery. And then once they are wearing the VR headset, they find themselves in a room that mirrors the gallery. So there you see that yellow bag, which is animated into the ocean to begin the game after you're dropped onto the New York City beach. And then you are also animated. You have the chance to walk along the island, and then you are swimming in a glimmering but treacherous ocean. The storyboard I created called for the player to swim through an aquatic world dense with plastic. In a game where there must be stakes to win, and in order to make the game as impactful as possible, I wanted the stakes to be high. The player is trapped under the surface by the plastic, and you'd have to accumulate enough information about plastic consumption by interacting with illuminated debris and to be able to resurface, buoyed by the specifics of their newly acquired environmental awareness. So on the right, you see the VR headset, and there is a little piece of technology attached to it. I feel like it makes the headset look like a Cyclops. But early on in the project, Danielle was helping me code the Vive controllers to recognize the swimming motion. But holding the controllers while trying to swim and play the game felt really unnatural. And I did some research and learned about the technology you could use with the Vive. It's called Leap Motion. And it's a little device that attaches to the headset, and then you no longer use controllers. The game is hands-free. And it was fortuitous because when I mentioned it to Danielle, she was already familiar and well-versed with Leap. She even had one in her backpack. And the overhaul of the project to accommodate this change from using controllers to going hands-free was huge. It was countless hours of additional coding and problem solving by Danielle, late nights with pizza and configuring the hands so that they would look like they were in scuba gear, and to be able to interact and touch these plastic particles. But the payoff was that the leap motion would enable the viewer to play hands-free and have the sensation of really swimming through the ocean. And I think that the physical sensation of swimming and feeling trapped by the plastic is heightened by the unique feature of the game. In her TEDx talk, Rogue Fong discusses the importance of the physical surroundings, providing an opportunity to enhance VR before, she says, before, during, and after the graphics. And so I attempt to do this by having the plastic pool on the floor through that swimming motion I just showed you and the sound. For the sound component, I had reached out to tech artist and rocker Clara Evans of the band Yacht to see if she'd be willing to donate her song Terminal Beach to the artwork. And it was such a lark. I just said, you know what, I'm going to ask her. And she said yes. And it was my hope that the combination of her lyrics, which are, there was a storm and we washed up on a terminal beach, combined with the little piece of plastic or two that ultimately clings to the player when they leave the gallery, will help them recognize the urgency of the environmental toll of plastics. So Plastic Swim opened at Wayfarers Gallery in Brooklyn the last weekend of February, just before the shutdown. The timing was a little anxiety provoking, but it was aligned to raise awareness about a new law that was going to take effect March 1st in New York. It was a single-use plastic ban. And by one estimate, New Yorkers were using 23 billion plastic bags each year, and 85% of which end up in landfills, waterways, and streets. And this was my way as an attempt to help curb plastic bag production. And if you click, so here you see Plastic Pool, that's the installation in the gallery. And you see like the player moving their hands, and here's a little video of what it looks like. You have to use sort of this brushstroke motion to swim through the game. And a lot of people had fun exploring the pool itself and sort of diving in. It's a few inches deep. In filmmaker Chris Milk's TED Talk, he refers to virtual reality as the ultimate empathy machine. And he believes, as do I, that because virtual reality takes you beyond the frame into a new world, that the player viewer experiences the humanity of that world in a deep way. And I think that creating immersive art installations with VR can heighten that connection even more. Removing the headset doesn't remove the memory of that illuminating information. And I hope the takeaway from the story I tell in Plastic Swim is one that builds empathy for our oceans, environment, and asks the viewer to reconsider their relationship with plastic. So COVID has presented new constraints for the project. People don't want to share headsets in galleries. They definitely want a more personal experience. And I'm very excited because next month, the Plastic Swim VR experience will be at Athica, the Athens Institute of Contemporary Art in Georgia, as part of the Lost in the Weeds exhibit curated by Craig Coleman and Naomi, who is here on the call. Today also has a piece in the show, and I'm excited to be in her good company. The full sculptural installation and the VR experience will be there, and I've transformed it into a 360 recording so it can be viewed on the smartphone. And now I'm currently back at Harvestworks, although virtually, and I'm thrilled to be working again with Danielle to create an AR version for iOS and Android devices. I hope to have it finished within the month. If VR brings you into a constructed world, AR brings that constructed world into your own physical space. I've learned all about a ground plane stage to trigger an object's appearance and anchoring your objects under the AR camera to be visible when looking at your screen. I've adapted the terrain to be more universal and looked at in AR apps. I've looked at AR apps like Hades and Becoming Biodiversity, which was actually also made at Harvestworks, for inspiration on front-loading directions for the experience. The biggest change was a brilliant suggestion from Danielle to use swipe interaction to swim, which I think perfectly marries the interaction to the phone. And I love that sort of the swimming motion is the aspect of the game that sort of drives the motion as well as the experience. I'm still thinking about game theory as a way to evoke empathy and inspire change. The project this time, it's not a solo adventure. You may have noticed on that last screen grab that there is a little red grouper who's a fish native to the Atlantic Ocean in the Northeast area and would be affected by all the plastic in the ocean. And I was inspired by Yoshi from Super Mario Brothers when I thought about a character who appears when you need him to guide you toward the affordances of the game. So I wanted to end my talk with one of the facts that you encounter in Plastic Swim that really resonates me, and it's a central theme for the artwork. And I took this screenshot while playing the game, and the appearance of the text as it happens here, it's distorted by swimming and also the underwater effects such as ripples and fog. But at the end of the game, when you've encountered enough facts about plastic to make your head swim, you're free to breathe again. And at the surface, the credits roll, and then I provide the names of the organizations that are tackling the issues of plastics in our ocean. So hopefully, if you're interested in the cause as well, you can experience the VR artwork. It's on my website, and you can encounter some of these resources too. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. That was a really quick overview, and I'm sure that there are some questions. It was really great to see how the work was developed.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And I love the leap motion. Yes, of course.
That was, I mean, like I mentioned, it was definitely it was a decision that felt necessary to make, but one that posed the most challenges for sure, and almost a literal overhaul of the entire project. All the coding that had been done thus far had to be changed to accommodate that. But I feel like, all the people who came to the gallery, it was in a way you're learning something, about the environment that's very staggering and eye-opening. But the experience it's this duality, because the experience of playing it is a little bit joyful. One of my friends who came brought her two boys. They're in middle school, and they wanted, every time you play the game, you might encounter different facts, but they had so much fun swimming and swimming. So it's sort of a little bit of an incentive to play the game a little longer.
Oh, the new work is AR, correct?
Yes.
And what's the rollout for the new work?
I'm hoping to have it finished by May 1st. I would say I'm close to the end. And like I said, it really came out of the idea of what to do next with the project. Really came out of COVID, because, like I said, this project, the show was up for 2 weeks before the gallery had to close. It was the last show ever at the gallery, which certainly was, never meant to be. And really, like I said, even the second week of the show, people were very hesitant to put on the headset and even touch the installation. There was a lot of Lysoling happening, and it forced me to realize that if it's going to be in galleries, especially right now, people might not want to put on the Vive headset. So I needed to, but everyone always has their phone in their hand. So how can we get the game onto the phone? I was able to make a 360 recording of the game, but it's not the same. It's not interactive anymore. So in talking with Danielle, we talked about, she came up with the AR solution. And so I feel like it's not my sabbatical anymore. And yet I'm still, taking the classes weekly with her. I always tell my students I'm still a student, because it's really exciting to learn all this new technology and the difference between the VR and the AR.
Right. How are you translating that into AR?
So the things that have remained the same. I almost want to say is the particles. And that, for me, I shared a little bit. Creating that tornado of particles is one of the most gratifying, because I had to take, I wrote hundreds, but it was probably more like thousands of photographs of individual pieces of plastic. And so you are still trapped underwater. It is still the same premise. I actually have, if you want, I can share. I have it's a work in progress view of the game. Oh no, that's the actual plastic sim. I'll show you the AR version. Are you able to see this?
Oh, yes, yes.
With Unity?
It's pretty different.
Yeah, so it starts with this little fish, and there'll be that text is placeholders for now, and this fish is going to talk to you. And so you'll be able to tap on your screen for the terrain to appear, and you'll be guided underwater by the fish. And so I haven't put the particles in there, but you will be trapped underwater with the particles. I think the particles with the facts that you'll learn are in there. And this grouper is like guiding, like saying to you, like, to play the game, you know, and exit the water, you need to swim towards the illuminated particles. So all these details, so you can see the text does appear on the screen, and as you get close. And then once you have encountered enough of the particles that, you know, to learn enough about the staggering statistics, you're sort of ejected from the water again. So the storyline is sort of the same, where you're trapped underwater, you have to counter the particles, but it's a lot more like a game. The music is going to be a little more playful too. It's sort of inspired by old-fashioned, I always say old-fashioned, like the video games I grew up with, you know, with the cute character, you know, guiding you throughout the way. It's meant to be a little more playful, you know, because as I shared, I feel like something I've seen with my students too is that when you play, you learn, and that becomes so meaningful and it stays with you. So hopefully the experience of playing this sort of interactive game on your phone, you know, the statistics and the facts will linger with you longer and inspire some change.
Well, it's just, I find it pretty amazing that you're able to pivot from and recognize that problem where the audience hesitates to put on the VR headset and actually pivot then to your phone, and it probably is good on an iPad, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And it's pretty, you know what, like in my own artistic practice, I've come to recognize how there's so much reciprocity between what I do in the classroom and then what I incorporate into my project. It was very similar when I had to, in the spring semester, pivot to teaching 3D design at home. And normally we are in the VR lab, but I couldn't, you know, I showed you where we were doing the 3D sketches. So I had them doing cardboard models, and then they were making the cardboard models in Tinkercad and exporting them into AR. So I teach AR with apps that already exist. So it's a little bit of a similar, like, that already exists, and I know how to use AR. Now, how do I make AR? So it's really cool to be on the other side. You know, and I just, you know, I can say I feel so grateful to, you know, be at Harvestworks and work with Danielle, but I think it makes, once you know how to make it, I think in a way to, you know, I hope that I bring that strength back to the classroom because I have a better understanding of how it was even made.
Agree, totally. You really immersed and put it into your creative practice.
Yeah.
Are there other questions that may come through the chat, or does anyone else have a question for Meredith? I guess there's no question. Let's see if I can come up with something. I thought the presentation was amazing. Let's see, it was so inspired to see the work. That's what Surabhi says.
Thank you. I mean, you know, just to share for anyone who has experience with Harvestworks, or you know, when my friend Sarah suggested it to me, and you're standing at the beginning of learning an entire new medium. I just, you know, the program, and the way that the independent study works is you're learning by making, and it's so valuable, and you take so much out of that rather than just, you know, I don't want to say lessons that lead to nowhere, but when you learn by doing, also, I feel like it made the pivot from VR to AR so much easier, because at that point, like, it becomes ingrained in you. You take that with you, you know. So now I'm still working in Unity. It's still the same platform of for software, you know, and I feel like I navigate it much more easily because I've intuited it from the first time around, rather than just going to school to learn VR. You know, it's really customized to what you need to learn. And it's just been the most incredible experience. Yes, I feel the same way about plastic. I sort of at the end of every day feel like sometimes it's like there's nothing we can do. Why is everything coming in this? Why is this in this extra plastic bag? It just seems there. It's just endless. And probably the best way that we can make a change is to stop using it as much as possible. And in addition to all these beach cleanups and other things, and we're all making a more conscious effort to not. So you go to the grocery store, right? And now there are no more plastic bags. They're like baby steps, but probably the less plastic that we buy and consume, then the bigger changes we'll see.
I mean, just the fact that in 2050 there will be more plastic than fish, that is so eye-opening, and you never ever want to touch a plastic bag again. It's amazing.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we could end a little early. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Carol.
Knowing kind of the technical trajectory that you went through to learn the applications and to get the piece together and to deal with the COVID thing was really nice to hear about. And I think we hope to see you again at Harvestworks. We hope to see everyone.
Yes, same.
All right.
Thank you, Carol, for having me.
All right.